Merle, thank you for the nice introduction. And I'm trying to remember the joke I told last year if it was that popular. But I have a new one. And this turtle went into the sheriff's office and said, God, I was just mugged by a bunch of snails. And the sheriff said, wow, did you get a good look? And he said, no, it happened too fast. Wow. I think last year's was better. All right, so let's go through the slides. A couple of commercial slides on the company, and then what I really want to talk about is frequency regulation, and really it's the shorter term needs on the power grid and what we cost effectively. And really where batteries are being deployed now and doing this kind of work. Excellent. I think it wasn't that button.
The bottom one is black and then right is full. So bottom one again.
Thank you. Perfect. So Altair Nano, we're a lithium titanate battery manufacturer. We make the chemistry up at our Reno headquarters facility. We then use a contract battery manufacturer in Korea to produce the cells that then come back to our manufacturing facility in Anderson, Indiana. That's where we do both the modules and then what we call our more solution-based businesses, the Alti ESS, which is tied with an inverter and does grid stability control. Great. So just a quick differentiator on the nano lithium titanate. I've got one more I got a chemistry slide coming up that'll describe it a little bit more. Wide operating temperature, a very fast charge rates, a lot of batteries, very fast discharge rate, but can handle sustained high currents. We talk 6C sustained to 10C to 12C speed of discharge and charging. Safe chemistry, and we do that by removing the graphite that's on the anode side. So quick, and the laser's on the bottom. Laser? The red, thanks. So primarily, I mean, the big difference here and what we make, the chemistry we make in Reno is the LTO that we use on the anode side. We remove the graphite from a typical lithium battery on the anode side, replace it with the LTO. And the primary difference really is we remove the SEI layer, which creates a barrier, creates some first cycle losses, and really leads to some of the thermal runaway issues that you hear about with lithium batteries. So we have a much safer type of technology, lithium technology, much higher temperature for creating that thermal runaway, and leads to a much longer cycle life. I asked a couple of questions this morning, all about life cycle assessment. And what does that mean to a battery, right? How do we can have a battery that can provide a lot of power or a lot of kilowatt hours, but if it doesn't last, there's going to be a challenge on cost effectiveness. In this case, our batteries, we're talking about 16,000 full depth of discharges. It's a logarithmic scale on the side for cycle life, and then depth of discharge on the bottom here. So, and you can see how it ratchets up as you have a shallower depth of discharge. Okay, so some of the demonstrations that we've done, a couple of projects that were done at Indianapolis Power and Light for AES, trailer-based solutions, each one has a megawatt of power, 250 kilowatt hours of energy storage. So not a lot of energy, but a lot of power for that size, and the ability then to cycle in and out of the batteries. And just to start getting a feel, because we're going to move this to frequency regulation and renewable integration pretty quickly, is what does that cycle look like? And so this is a day, 24 hours, of responding to an automatic generator load control signal that you get every 4 seconds from a regional transmission organization. And there's multiple of those throughout North America. Those organizations are under regulatory control by FERC, Federal Energy Regulation Commission. And the whole idea of that is to create a balanced, secure, reliable energy infrastructure, transmission infrastructure in North America. And part of that is creating this AGLC, Automatic Generator Load Control Signal, that's based off of, here you go, the ACE signal, Area Control Error, that looks at these balancing areas, these regional transmission organizations, and looking how much power is flowing in or out and maintaining that balance. And off of that error, they then create a signal that's sent to all the generators that are within that transmission organization to either raise or lower their output so that we can have a stable 60 hertz signal throughout North America or throughout the balancing areas. So just quickly looking at this one here, through that 24 hours, we were using minus 400 to 400 kilowatts throughout the day. State of charge, once again, this is a 250 kilowatt hour machine providing this power up and down. In the afternoon, maybe some higher pulses, having to absorb power very quickly down to a megawatt. And the state of charge, relatively limited to the band of really 60 to 30 state of charge, so well within the 250 kilowatt hours of energy. Being used elsewhere, this is a project in El Salvador, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. Grid stability that I talked about, generation capacity, which we'll talk about a little bit more, and then very scalable from 1 to 20 megawatts to as large as you need it to be. Renewable integration happening in Hawaii, doing a 1.2 MVA system at a wind farm in Hawaii for doing renewable integration. And then similar sort of thing, you look at a bus. This is Foothill Transit has put in several of these buses made by Proterra. And if you think about it, it's a microgrid. You're starting and stopping, once again dealing with the transient needs on that grid, and being able to absorb or discharge the power as you need. And you can look at some of the value here that we bring, and certainly you look at incredible miles per gallon as you're able to recapture and recycle that energy. Okay, but let's talk. Really, the talk is focused on the power grid, and if you think about what happens during the day and what your grid needs to do throughout that time period, and you can talk about a small grid or you can talk about a large grid, but you have pretty much a base load that occurs during the evening. And then what happens is you start ramping up. You have your peak load during the day. Sometimes you have a notch as maybe commercial businesses are shutting down and people are heading home. Then you come back and the power offloads during the day. Well, how does that get taken care of? I mean, it just doesn't happen on its own. You have vertically integrated utilities that might be providing all of the energy that their customers need, or you might have a deregulated market where there's not only the energy companies, the load-serving entities, in this case like PG&E or Southern California Edison or San Diego Gas and Electric, but you have the regional transmission operators, in our case, California ISO. And they're constantly scheduling, sometimes a day ahead, sometimes further, sometimes very short. There's a 5-minute real-time dispatch period for dispatching energy. And that energy can go from the day-ahead scheduling, which really shapes the curve as you're looking at, hey, what do we need here? How much energy do we need here? And you bring it all the way through. To load following, which is tens of minutes to hours, and this is day as you're scheduling the time. But the tens of minutes to hours is, hey, as we're ramping up quickly, maybe we're ramping up faster than we thought. Maybe we're ramping up slower. We got to shut some units down. And that's going on in the hours. And then you have the regulation market, which is what we're going to focus on in the rest of this talk. And that's the second-to-second fluctuation of the grid. And you're typically seeing that fluctuation occur as your load changes. If we turn the lights off in this room, somewhere some generator has to put out a little bit less energy. If a substation trips offline, you've got to shut down a lot of generation at that point, whatever was carrying on that line. I mean, everybody's probably heard the term, the electric grid is probably the largest just-in-time delivery service that we have. That's out here, and it's an amazing machine that's interconnected throughout North America, or at least it will be once Tres Amigas is tied together. But you basically have the Western interconnect, you have the Eastern interconnect, Southwest power pool, and then you have ERCOT, which is down. Texas is kind of on its own, very small, very light ties that tie it to other grids. And in fact, they're not even regulated by FERC because their transmission grid doesn't cross over state lines. So they have their own transmission operation down there. All right, so let's move on. So yeah, frequency regulation. We're going to tie in, we're just going to focus on this seconds to minutes now, which is, as I mentioned, a very high value and something that batteries can bring value to and are bringing value to right now. Or limited energy storage resources, because we're going to include flywheels into that. Maybe people are saying, well, I don't really care about frequency regulation. Well, you should, because it's pretty important. It's happening all the time, and there's actually a lot of money that's being spent on it to make this happen. And why is it so important? We have two charts here, stable network going from 56 to 63, although hopefully you'll never get there. But equipment damage here, typically you're at this point, you're going through over voltage events. At that point, maybe you did have some substation shut down or trip offline, or maybe a large portion of the grid, a transmission line like can happen, and suddenly you have too much generation and your voltage builds up and you start blowing circuits, and hopefully before then you'll be tripping your protective relays. And then down at the lower end, you might have too much load, maybe a line tripped to a generator, maybe one of the nuclear plants tripped offline, and suddenly you have all this load but no generation, and things start slowing down, just start bogging down to control that. And as you go through those periods, you have a governor, as you're moving around 60, you have a governor response, over frequency generation trip, equipment damage, and downstream under frequency load shedding, under frequency generation trip. But in the middle here, you have a lot of what's called spinning reserve and frequency regulation. So as we go through here, we look, now this scale on this side is zoomed right in, right around 60. You can see now it's 59.95 to 60. And so here's your normal deviation with the automatic generator control corrective action range. This is where the signal is being sent based on the area control error that's being looked at, all the different boundary areas. And they are telling the generators, hey, you guys, speed up or slow down to maintain this, and it's going on every 4 seconds, getting that signal. And as it's telling it, hey, we need another 20 megawatts, or we need another 10 megawatts, the generators will start ramping up. And what you see in that time period is not a generator that suddenly says, okay, here's another 20 megawatts, or let me take off 20 megawatts. They start ramping. And they have 10 minutes to get to that. That's part of the tariff. You have 10 minutes to get to that point. And of course, we're saying a signal every 4 seconds. So as they're ramping up, another signal is coming in, maybe to ramp up higher, or it could be to ramp down. And you're constantly trailing the signal. And that's where limited energy storage resources bring value right now. And typically, this is historically 1% to 2% of the load. So in California, you're looking at a peak load, let's just say, of 50,000 megawatts. So you're looking at about 500 megawatts then of regulation that they have to schedule the day ahead, 500 megawatts of capacity. In other areas like PJM, they have roughly 1,000 megawatts. 100,000 megawatts, and they're scheduling about 1,000 megawatts of regulation. We can kind of rip through this real quick. Just off of the IEA website, looking at what's happening. This is projected 2010, 2011. This is a peak non-coincident load. So this is high. This is a high number, but if you look at the continuous United States, 772,000 megawatts of load. And if you take 1%, 7721 of regulation that's being purchased, and if you're looking at the value of regulation of being around $30 a megawatt, your capacity, and then they'll pay energy on top of that as you're providing that load. What's the value of that? If you multiply it by 8760, and this is 1%, it's about a $2 billion market that's being paid for right now by us, really. Because those services that are being purchased then get fed back to the load-serving entities like a PG&E or a San Diego or Southern California Edison, and that goes into the rate base, and that just shows up on your bill, and that's how they account for, in this case, frequency regulation, but other ancillary services too. Frequency regulation is the highest value ancillary service. Typically after that you have spinning reserve, non-spinning reserve, and voltage support, just in an order of magnitude. And when I say an order of magnitude, $30 for frequency regulation, non-spinning reserve might be $3, right? A megawatt capacity to have that available. And then they'll pay you for that energy, but you shouldn't be having to burn any fuel or anything, just to have it spinning. A little bit of extra O&M, maybe a little slight reduction in your heat rate. So the point being is we're at about 1% now, and we're looking at around a $2 billion market through North America for doing frequency regulation. So